Early October afternoon, golden autumn sunlight slanted through the large windows of Mount Hope Hospital's obstetrician-gynecologist clinic, nestled just outside of Boston. The air in the waiting room felt thick with silence, quiet but suffocating. Rachel Monroe sat hunched slightly forward, her dark brown hair pulled into a neat bun, exposing a furrowed brow creased with tension. It had been over an hour since the doctor had left the room with her test results, yet every minute dragged like an eternity. Inside her mind churned a storm, hope, fear, doubt, and a quiet sorrow that had been building over 5 years of a childless marriage. The door finally opened with a soft click. Dr. Karen walked in, wearing a calm, reassuring smile. "Rachel," she said, gently setting the folder down on the desk. "All your numbers look good. To be honest, you're perfectly capable of getting pregnant." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. She slowly sat back down, her lips trembling slightly. It took her a few seconds to find her voice. "Then, why haven't we been able to, for 5 years? Dr. Karen's tone was kind but firm. "I think it's time Daniel had his fertility checked as well." Daniel, her husband. The man who had always assumed that the reason they couldn't have children was her. He had become someone who brushed past her each night after a long day, rarely asking anything more than, "Did you cook something?" Rachel felt a lump rise in her throat. She nodded, stood up, thanked the doctor, and quietly left the room. Outside the clinic, she called Daniel. He picked up after the third ring. "Are you done with work?" she asked, her voice a little shaky. "I just finished my appointment and I'm feeling a bit dizzy. Could you come pick me up?" He hesitated. "Right now? I'm still in a meeting, but fine, I'll come." She smiled faintly. He was coming. Maybe out of duty more than care, but still, he was coming. And somehow that was enough to make her feel like she still had a place in this marriage. About 40 minutes later, Daniel's silver SUV pulled up in front of the hospital. He didn't get out, just rolled the window down, his expression a mix of impatience and something colder. Rachel climbed in, shut the door gently, and glanced at him, trying to smile. "Thanks for coming. There's something I need to tell you." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." "I just got the results back. The doctor said I'm fine. Everything's normal, fertility-wise, and she suggested that maybe you should get checked too." For a split second, the air inside the car turned still, frozen. Daniel turned to her, his brows tightening. "What did you just say?" "I mean, if we both get tested, we can understand better what's going on. Then maybe we can move forward with treatment." "You're saying it's my fault?" he snapped, his voice suddenly sharp. Rachel said softly, "No, I'm not. I'm not accusing you of anything. I just want—" "Listen to me, Rachel." Daniel cut her off, his hands tightening around the steering wheel. "I'm fine. I'm perfectly healthy. You're the one who needs to figure out what's wrong. Don't try to pin this on me just because you can't get pregnant." The words hit Rachel like a blade straight through her chest. "I'm not blaming you," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I just wanted us to face this together. Like a team, like a married couple." Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "Give me a break. What kind of wife asks her husband to get checked like that? Don't you feel embarrassed?" "You feel embarrassed? What about me?" Rachel's voice cracked. "For 5 years, I've lived month after month on hope and heartbreak. I've prayed at church, taken every supplement, done yoga, cut coffee, quit drinking, just so I could have a child with you. I've sacrificed so much, Daniel. Do you think I'm not hurting?" Daniel stared straight ahead, saying nothing. Rachel turned her face toward the window, swallowing back tears. She hadn't expected him to pull her into an embrace and say sorry, but a part of her had hoped he'd at least listen. Just once. The silence in the car turned suffocating. Daniel let out a sharp exhale and muttered, "If you're going to keep nagging, take a cab home. Don't waste my time with this pointless crap." Rachel didn't respond. And with that, the car rolled forward. On the way home, they stopped at a gas station. Daniel got out to pump gas and went into the convenience store to buy a drink. Rachel stayed in the car, her body tense with exhaustion from the appointment and the argument. But she couldn't sleep, not after everything he'd said. His words echoed in her mind, cold and cutting. "Don't blame me just because you're the one who can't get pregnant." For years, Rachel had endured. She had blamed herself enough. But now, after the doctor confirmed she was perfectly healthy, the tiny cracks in her trust began to split wide open. A small motion pulled her back to the present. As she bent down to pick up her bag, which had slipped to the car floor, her hand brushed against something unusual wedged between the passenger seat and the center console. It was a brand new sanitary pad, but not the kind she used. It had a faint, sweet scent of perfume, something light and floral, feminine. Clearly it belonged to another woman. Rachel's hand trembled slightly as she held it. Her mind spun with possibilities, a nauseating rush of suspicion. She inhaled deeply, placed the pad into her purse, and glanced around the car. For the first time in months, Rachel looked at the SUV not as a familiar place, but as a stranger's space. And suddenly she saw it. All the subtle signs she had ignored. A few strands of platinum blonde hair stuck to the fabric of the back seat. A perfume that wasn't hers, lingering faintly on the driver's seatbelt. Even a barely visible smudge of lipstick on the inside of the driver's side window, right where Daniel usually rested his arm. She remembered now the strange charges on last month's credit card statement. Dinner at a seafood restaurant she and Daniel had never been to. 2 tickets to a concert neither of them had mentioned. And a transaction from Spa Étoile that read couples massage. Private room. When Daniel returned, Rachel had already composed herself. She looked up at him and offered a soft, practiced smile. "What did you get?" "Just a bottle of water. You want some?" he asked, his voice flat. "No thanks," she replied calmly. That night, after Daniel had fallen asleep, Rachel sat in the dim glow of her laptop in the living room. She gently closed the door behind her so the light wouldn't bother him. She began combing through the credit card statements, documents she used to leave in Daniel's hands because he once said, "It's unattractive when women nitpick about money." But now, every number was a breadcrumb. And with steady hands, she traced each one to build a picture of betrayal. For the past 3 months, certain charges kept showing up. Le Jardin Perfume Boutique, Étoile Spa, Moonlight Garden Restaurant, all upscale, romantic places, not the kind of places she and Daniel ever went, especially now when they were still making mortgage payments on their new house. There was even a hotel invoice in New York. On a weekend, Daniel had said he was away for a short work trip, not worth dragging you along. Rachel noted every location, every timestamp. She didn't lose her temper. She didn't cry. Something sharper had taken over. She was no longer just hurt, she was aware. Awake. She was turning pain into instinct. A few days later, during her lunch break, Rachel dropped by Daniel's office. She carried a tin of homemade cookies, the perfect excuse to show up unannounced without raising suspicion. The receptionist greeted her with a neutral smile. "Oh, hi. Daniel just stepped out. I believe he left with the new intern, Sierra, if I'm not mistaken." Sierra. Rachel pressed her lips together. That name had come up recently, in a few work emails Daniel had carelessly left open. She'd looked her up online, and it hadn't been hard. Sierra Collins, 24, freshly graduated, currently interning in the marketing department at Daniel's company. Big eyes, blonde hair, a bright, glossy smile in every photo, usually posed beside a brand new Audi. That car, Daniel had bought it for her. On Sierra's Instagram, there were no pictures directly with Daniel, but there were shots from the balcony of a luxury apartment, designer handbags, spa gift boxes, and a photo of her legs stretched out on a pool chair at a Palm Springs resort, the exact weekend Daniel had claimed to be at a year-end strategy retreat. Rachel didn't feel her heart break. It calcified. That night, after her second shift at a little cafe downtown, the job she picked up 3 nights a week to help with their mortgage, Rachel came home, set her bag down, and quietly took out a plastic meal container. Inside, a simple salad, a slice of dry bread, and a few sliced apples. Plain, inexpensive, filling. The dinner of a woman trying to keep a roof over her head while her husband lavished someone else with spa days and champagne. She stared at her modest meal, forcing herself to chew. The house around her was still, hollow, while somewhere across town, in some upscale apartment, Sierra was likely having lobster, applying a 24-karat gold face mask, stretched out on a mattress worth more than Rachel's entire bedroom. And Rachel, the wife in name, the woman who helped build this life with Daniel, now sat like a shadow in the home they once dreamed about together. She suddenly remembered a quote from a book she once loved. Women don't discover betrayal because they're naive. They discover it because they've learned to see the world through the eyes of someone who's already been lied to. She sat at her vanity, slowly wiping off the faded makeup from her face. Starting tomorrow, she would keep showing up to work. Keep breathing. Keep living, not for Daniel, but for the day she'd walk away from this marriage with grace, head held high, and not a trace of regret. November in Boston was bitter, the kind of cold that stung the skin, but it still didn't compare to the chill that crept through Rachel's kitchen every night Daniel came home. He didn't even look at her. Sure, they still shared the occasional meal, still exchanged a few casual lines about the weather, gas prices, or the market. But the space between them had grown into something hollow and unspoken. There were no more small touches, no more light kisses while she made tea, not even the basic intimacy of a couple sharing the same home. Rachel felt like she was living with a stranger on a long-term lease, and she was the only one trying to keep the house from crumbling. Sierra Collins, 24, Daniel's intern, was everything he craved. Youthful, reckless, the kind of woman who made a man feel like he was 25 again. She wasn't classically beautiful, but she smiled at the right moments, complained just enough, and knew how to project that perfect damsel-in-distress energy men couldn't seem to resist. She never showed up with Daniel in public, but she was excellent at leaving a trail. One evening, Rachel received a text from an unknown number. Attached was a photo of Daniel holding hands with a young woman at an upscale rooftop bar. In the picture, Sierra beamed, and Daniel leaned in toward her, eyes burning with attention. The message had just 3 words. "He is mine." Rachel didn't reply. She didn't need to. Anger was the reaction the enemy wanted. What Daniel didn't know was that Sierra had already started pushing boundaries. She'd been spoiled, with money, with promises like, "My wife won't be a problem much longer." But when Daniel kept stalling, still married, still indecisive, Sierra took matters into her own hands. She got pregnant. It happened after a weekend getaway in Napa Valley, where Daniel had spent over $3,000 on a luxury villa for one night. The next morning, Sierra sent him a photo of a positive pregnancy test. And a soft, trembling message. "I'm so scared. I don't know what to do." Daniel was shaken, but oddly thrilled. After all these years, the idea of having a child felt like validation, a trophy. Proof that he was still a man, still potent, still in control of something in a world that had started slipping out from under him. Yet he couldn't bring himself to say a word to Rachel. Instead, he grew even colder toward her, as if he'd quietly downgraded her to a shadow in the house. A barren placeholder in a life he now saw heading somewhere else. After repeatedly sending provocative texts to irritate Rachel, leaving perfume traces and lipstick smudges on Daniel's collar, all without a single reaction from his wife, Sierra finally snapped. She called Rachel late one night, voice trembling with feigned remorse. "I'm sorry," she began, trying to sound soft. "Please don't misunderstand. I'm not trying to take anything from you. It's just, he told me you don't love him anymore, that you two only stay together out of obligation." Rachel said nothing. "I know you're smart, accomplished, but sometimes a woman has to know when to let go. I'm not asking for anything. I just want to give him a child, to let him be a father, something you haven't been able to do." Every word sliced through Rachel's pride like a sharp, sugary blade, but her voice remained steady, cool. "Good luck with that." Sierra let out a delicate laugh and hung up. After that night, Daniel began to unravel. The guilt, the pressure, the lies. They all started to crack his polished veneer. Rachel found him one evening in the garage, speaking harshly into his phone, pacing. "I told you, don't call me at this hour." Moments later, he entered the kitchen, trying to appear normal. He mumbled, "Work's been intense. They just added a new deadline. I'm under a lot of pressure." Rachel nodded and handed him a cup of coffee. No questions, no accusations, but it was the silence that suffocated him. Soon, he started coming home later, started grabbing dinner out, started sleeping at the office some nights, or so he claimed. Then one day, while Rachel was washing dishes, Daniel walked into the kitchen and blurted it out. "I think you should start preparing to live more independently." Rachel froze, her hands still submerged in the soapy water. "You want a divorce?" she asked, voice light, almost calm. Daniel hesitated. His eyes drifted away toward anything but her. "Not exactly. I think you deserve someone who can give you what you really want. A real family." Rachel tilted her head slightly. "You mean you've found someone who can?" He didn't answer, but silence has its own language, and it said everything. Rachel dried her hands slowly, then reached for her wedding ring. She slipped it off and placed it gently on the table. She didn't cry. She simply looked at him long and steady. She said, "You know what's the saddest part, Daniel? It's not that you cheated. It's that you didn't have the courage to admit you did." Daniel opened his mouth as if to explain or defend himself, but in the end, he just bowed his head, shame tightening around his shoulders like a noose. And so, it was Rachel who filed the paperwork first. At the law office, Daniel sat quietly beside her, refusing to meet her eyes. She asked for only one thing. "You can keep the house and continue handling the mortgage. I'll move out. I don't want anything else." "Rachel, don't pity me," she cut him off, her eyes unwavering. When she stepped out of the attorney's office, the rain had begun to fall. Her dark brown hair clung to her cheeks, lipstick completely washed away, and yet Rachel had never felt more free. It had been raining since morning when she walked into the South Boston office of Child Protective Services. Her shoes were nearly soaked through. The thin raincoat she wore did little to keep out the cold wind seeping into her collar. But Rachel had grown used to the cold, both the kind that came from the sky and the kind that settled deep in the chest. It had been 5 years since she walked away from that house, leaving behind everything, her belongings, her wedding ring, and all the illusions she used to call family. Her new life didn't come with red roses or the warmth of someone pulling her into an embrace at night, but it came with peace, with little hands that reached for her and voices that called her Miss Rachel with quiet gratitude, with a job that asked for strength, not perfection, and gave her a sense of purpose that marriage never could. That morning, the office received an urgent call from the police. A suspected case of child abuse in a Dorchester apartment complex. The neighbor had reported the incident. They'd heard crying, loud and raw, followed by the sounds of things breaking, echoing for nearly an hour. The police had intervened, but they needed someone from Child Protective Services to take over. Rachel volunteered. She always chose the tough cases, the rundown apartments, the situations that most people would turn down, not to prove anything, but because she knew some kinds of pain need to be faced, not avoided. By the time she arrived, it was still raining. The apartment was in an old, crumbling housing complex, peeling paint, cracked stairwells, the air heavy with mildew, floor cleaner, and cigarette smoke. A police officer met her in the hallway on the 3rd floor, leading her to a door with broken hinges and splintered wood. "The man claiming to be the father is being held in the living room," the officer said in a low voice. "The boy is in severe emotional distress. There's also suspicion of custody fraud. The man says he's the legal guardian. But the documents he showed us are flimsy. No original birth certificate, no court orders, no adoption papers, nothing from the hospital confirming any biological link." Rachel nodded, opening her notepad. "Name of the father?" "Daniel Monroe." She froze. For a split second, her heartbeat stopped. She looked up, her gaze locking onto the door just barely ajar ahead of her. Daniel, her ex-husband. None of the officers or staff working that shift knew they had once been married. Rachel stepped into the apartment with a steady posture, her voice calm and professional, just like always. Daniel was sitting on the floor, hands cuffed loosely behind his back, his shirt wrinkled and stained, hair a tangled mess, face sunken and pale. He looked up, and his eyes locked with Rachel's. For a second, he thought he was hallucinating. "Rachel," he whispered. She didn't answer. Instead, she gave a quiet nod to the officer and stepped past him, toward the small child curled up in the corner of the room, a boy no older than 5, trembling, tears streaming down his cheeks, his sobs catching in his throat. "Hey, sweetheart, what's your name?" she asked gently. Jaden, the boy hiccuped. Rachel slowly took off her thin coat and wrapped it around him, her hands steady, comforting, as if this wasn't the first time she had done this. In that moment, she wasn't the ex-wife with a fractured heart. She was a protector for any child who needed warmth and safety. A little while later, the officers removed Daniel's cuffs, though they continued to monitor him closely. He staggered toward Rachel, his voice unsteady from the cold and panic. "Rachel, I know I'm the last person you want to see, but I didn't know who else to call." She stood up slowly, eyes fixed on the man who had once abandoned her. Daniel swallowed hard. "I found out. Jaden isn't my son." He paused, voice cracking. "I got a paternity test. The result said I'm sterile, permanently." There was no more arrogance in his eyes, only shock and shame. "Sierra. She disappeared. Took everything. The money, the apartment. It was under her name. The car, too. She said the boy was mine. But now—" His voice trailed off as he collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. Rachel didn't move. Not even a blink. She had imagined this reunion 1,000 different ways, with anger, with triumph, maybe even some bitter satisfaction watching him fall apart. But now, with Daniel on his knees before her, she felt nothing. No rage, no relief, no tears. "Rachel." He looked up at her, eyes rimmed red, voice raw. "I've lost everything. I was wrong. Please, give me another chance." She stepped closer and knelt down, meeting him at eye level. Her voice was quiet but steady. She said, "Do you know what the saddest part is, Daniel? It's that for years, I thought it was my fault. I lived like a ghost, believing I wasn't enough. Not enough to be a mother, not enough to keep a marriage together. I lost myself while you went looking for faith in someone else." Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but Rachel gently raised her hand to stop him. "You don't need to apologize. I'm not waiting for that anymore. I started a new life the day you signed those divorce papers." She paused, then added with quiet finality, "I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't mean going back. It means I no longer carry you in my heart." 1 week later, Jaden was placed in temporary foster care. Rachel visited him from time to time. Daniel was further investigated for document fraud, but wasn't criminally charged. There was no clear evidence of abuse, just a man unraveling after realizing he'd been deceived for 5 years. A few days later, Rachel sat in the small garden behind the children's center, watching kids run and laugh in the crisp afternoon air. Suddenly, a group of little ones ran up behind her, wrapping their arms around her with playful shouts, "Mama Rachel!" She turned around, a radiant smile spreading across her face. The woman who once believed she couldn't be a mother was now mothering in her own way. "Dear my friends, you see, letting go isn't losing. It's beginning, not from heartbreak, but from strength. A woman's worth isn't defined by her ability to bear children, but by her capacity to love, to heal, and to rise, even from the wreckage of what tried to break her."